Today we take quite a leap forward into the history of philosophy, from the 2nd century up to the 17th century. And much of the philosophical thought in the interim was devoted to the relationship between faith and reason. And we sometimes refer to this as scholastic philosophy, wherein the question is to discern the province of reason from that of faith, and to question whether they intersect. And it was the opinion of many great thinkers that some of the most important articles of faith, namely the existence of God, the existence of the soul, were demonstrable by human reason. That I could achieve the same conclusions by exercising my cognitive faculty that one can achieve on the basis of faith. And very interestingly, when we enter the 17th century, which of course is referred to as the modern period of philosophy, and what was modern about it was the great advances made in the sciences at this time. The refinement of our ability to gaze into the vast distances of the cosmos with telescopes and to peer into the very small with microscopes, and then to subject those observations to a mathematics, a calculus, which could express the principles which govern the behavior of objects in space and time. Namely, the development of the scientific method. During the modern period opens up the hope that the questions plaguing metaphysicians since the pre-Socratic thinkers about what the world was really made of, about its origin, about whether it has a purpose, and what our place within it might be, could be addressed rationally. This is the age of enlightenment, where the hope exists that we can find rational answers to the questions which are most important to us. And we find in the work of René Descartes, which we'll begin today, really an intersection of the scientific concern with knowledge and the still lingering metaphysical concern with what you might call the spiritual. And what ingenious among many things in Descartes is that the way he demonstrates the possibility of our achieving knowledge in the sciences is on the basis of spiritual principles, namely the existence of God and the real distinction between mind and body. But before we begin this excursion into Descartes' Meditations, I'd like to situate Descartes a bit more in the history. During this period of modern philosophy, which is roughly the 17th century, but does, of course, begin even at the end of the 15th century and into the 16th, coming to a close sometime in the 18th century. Is the time of the dawning of the scientific age, when people like Francis Bacon helped to codify the scientific method. And what we find during this period is that the two major traditions initiated in the ancient period, namely Plato's rationalistic perspective on how one ought to do philosophy, and Aristotle's more empirical, teleological approach to how one ought to proceed. In these two great modern traditions, rationalism is really the offspring of Plato, because it is the view that knowledge, in the strictest sense, and remember from Plato that to call some belief a piece of knowledge requires that its object be something real and unchanging. Rationalism is the view, shared by Plato, that knowledge is possible purely a priori. And this is a term which you will have to grow accustomed to using. The a priori means independent of sensory perception. And you can see our word prior here. Even though the a priori does not, strictly speaking, have a temporal connotation, it does not really mean before sensory perception of the world, but independent of it. And if you think back to Plato and his idea of anamnesis, that learning is recollecting something that we already know but have forgotten. The idea that knowledge is possible simply through reasoning and without the benefit of using our senses is really Platonic. And not only is it possible for us to know things about reality without using our senses, without ever looking at the world or touching it, hearing it, but in fact, the senses could never tell us what is ultimately real. Because what is ultimately real for the rationalists, as for Plato, does not reveal itself to the senses. Okay? Now, the three major thinkers belonging to this rationalist tradition are Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. And although we are going to spend time looking very closely at the work of Descartes, I will, from time to time, make reference to Spinoza and Leibniz because they contribute ideas which are seminal to the ongoing discussion pertaining to metaphysical and epistemological issues. The other major tradition of the 17th century is empiricism, which is really the offspring of Aristotle and his emphasis on the perceptual. While rationalism maintains that knowledge is possible on the basis of reason alone, unassisted by the senses, empiricism is the view that all knowledge must originate with sensory perception. That there can be no knowledge prior to experience. Okay?
Can you repeat the part about all knowledge originates?
Yes.
Can you say that again?
The way I like to define empiricism is as the view that all knowledge must originate with a sensory perception. And when we get to the readings from Berkeley and Hume, I will make reference to Locke, who begins with the premise that there is nothing in the mind that isn't first in the senses. That until we have stimulus from the external world through our senses, the mind is a tabula rasa, a blank slate. There's just nothing going on up there. Okay? One metaphor I like to use to describe the difference between the rationalist and empiricist traditions is that, at least it used to be this way, that when you buy a computer, often it will come with preloaded software. So you buy your computer and you turn it on to find that it already has a web browser. Internet Explorer has been preloaded. Okay? Or a drawing program. Okay? Or a word processing program. It's got software from day one. But especially when personal computers first really came on the scene, often all you would purchase would be an operating system. And whatever software you wanted needed to be purchased separately and downloaded into that computer. Well, rationalism is sort of the view that the mind is like a computer without any software. It has potential. Okay? It's got neurons and things. But you've got to feed it some data to give it content. While empiricism is sort of like equating the mind to the computer which already has software loaded in it. That we come into the world with ideas already there. Innate. Okay? And maybe that metaphor helps you, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it'll make more sense to you later. But at this point, what I want you to remember is that we are in the period of history when the scientific method is first really gaining momentum. And Descartes is considered to be the father of modern philosophy because his concern was that the findings of our various sciences proceed from a firm beginning point, a sound foundation. Because if the very most basic assumptions from which we proceed in establishing systems of knowledge, whether it be biological or anthropological or sociological or psychological, philosophical knowledge, unless, for example, our method of making advances in these sciences is itself sound, then nothing which we discover on the basis of that method is reliable, right? What you see when you gaze into the night sky is only as reliable as your telescope, okay? And this idea that knowledge must begin from sound foundations is often called foundationalism. Okay? Well, I'll dismiss our empiricists for now, since we're not going to be talking about them for a little while.
You compared tabula rasa to rationalism?
No, that's the empiricist idea. The idea of the tabula rasa actually is a behaviorist idea. Someone like B.F. Skinner, who thinks that all behavior is the result of nurturing, that we aren't born with any tendencies. Okay? But the rationalists disagree with this concept. The rationalists maintain that we do possess a priori ideas, or ideas which are present prior to having any kind of sensory experience of the world. And as we'll see for Descartes, there are two ideas which are properly a priori. One of them is his idea of himself. Descartes argues that his idea of his own consciousness does not depend upon a sensory experience. And he also maintains that he is in possession of an idea of God that does not depend on any sensory experience. I never had to hear somebody teach me about God in order already to understand the concept of a divine being. Okay? But of course, that is all upcoming. Now, Descartes is sometimes called a foundationalist. And the reason is that, of course, we know Descartes is a geometer, right? He's a mathematician, and he's got a particular fondness for geometry. And you've already learned about this in high school, right? What is this?
Cartesian plane.
That's right. A graph is a series of Cartesian coordinates. And Cartesian is just the adjectival form of the name Descartes. When I say Cartesian ideas, I mean the ideas belonging to Descartes. Okay? And as a geometer, Descartes was really taken with the precision and the explanatory power that mathematics has to make sense of things. Because mathematics is regarded as a universal science consisting entirely of absolutely necessary propositions. Okay? Or to give you an example, 1 plus 1 equals 2. And that is a universal and necessary proposition. What does universal mean?
It's always true.
Yes, always and everywhere. Always, I think, is more we mean by eternal. But yes, universality does have the connotation of eternality as well. But to say that 1 plus 1 equals 2 is a universal truth means that it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what world you live on. 1 plus 1 equals 2 is true. Okay? And to say that it is a necessary proposition means what?
Need a rose to come up with the formula?
Need a what to come up with
Like
the formula?
you said the necessary, like
It is
need
in-
a rose to come up with the math. There was a need there first.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. An intelligent response, not the one I'm looking for. Okay? Indeed, mathematics is necessary, I would say, in order to do physics at all. Okay? It is the language of physics, calculus.
Wasn't that the basis for his argument for the existence of God? Something eternal?
Well, yes, certainly. Included in Descartes' idea of God is the concept of eternality. And we're going to look very closely at how all of that's connected. Okay?
It's necessary for life as we know it to exist.
That's very close to his answer. Here's what I mean by necessary, and here's what Descartes means by necessary. It can't be otherwise. Okay? The opposite of a necessary proposition is a contingent proposition. Okay? Necessary versus contingent. When I say 1 plus 1 equals 2 is a necessary proposition, I mean that the truth of that proposition, or that judgment, does not depend upon anything else for its truth. So it doesn't depend on my ever having thought about it. It doesn't depend on any human beings ever having existed. Its truth is absolutely necessary because it can't possibly be otherwise. Whereas a contingent truth is a judgment which depends upon something else. Okay? If I say the lights are on, that is a contingent proposition because the lights do not necessarily need to be on. I could go shut them off. It is entirely possible for me to conceive of a world in which the lights in this room are off at this moment. There is no contradiction in supposing so. Whereas there is indeed a contradiction in the idea that 1 plus 1 does not equal 2. And I can demonstrate to you the necessity of this proposition. Because I am not saying anything more than this. What I mean by 1 is that. What I mean by 1 plus 1 is that, and another 1 just like it. And what I mean by 2 is that. And it doesn't get any simpler than that. 1 plus another 1 cannot be anything other than 2. And it's not a matter of semantics. It makes no difference whether you say 2 or dos or dia, okay, or zwei. It doesn't matter what the word is. The point is that the quantity of 1 plus the quantity of 1 equals the quantity of 2. Okay?
And this is rationalism, correct?
Even the empiricists would agree that some judgments, like mathematical ones, are a priori, but in a different sense. I want to put that off, okay? But yes, for now we're focusing on rationalism. And the reason that we bring it up is this. Descartes wants to know if the same sort of certainty and, as I've just said, universality and necessity that attaches to mathematical judgments can be asserted of other kinds of knowledge. Can I, for example, know where the world came from with the same certainty that I know math? Can I know that God exists with the same certainty that I know mathematics? Can I know that there is a soul and that the soul is different than the body? Or that I am free? Or that there is an afterlife? Okay? Now, of course, those are major questions. But the way Descartes presents the Meditations is as an epistemological concern. He sees what's going on around him. The sciences are exploding, okay? And his concern is that they all rest upon some basic assumptions. But if those assumptions themselves are unreliable, then anything founded upon them is also unreliable. Now, when it comes to everyday life, we don't demand this degree of certainty. We have to make judgments in our everyday lives in the face of imperfect knowledge. Okay? I can't wait for absolute certainty every time I want to make a decision. Otherwise, I'd be completely stifled. Okay? But philosophically speaking, I do have that luxury. Okay? I never have to affirm or deny any proposition until I find it to be either justified or unjustified. Okay? Now let's talk for a minute about why Descartes thinks that all knowledge is like geometry. And it has to do with the way that knowledge is structured. Okay, let's talk about geometry. If you took any high school geometry, then you know something about geometrical proof. Like how I might go about proving that the opposite interior angles of a triangle are equal. Or how I might go about proving that the longest leg of a triangle is opposite the largest angle. Okay? These are geometrical proofs. And geometrical proofs all begin with some very basic principles, which are so basic that in fact you cannot even prove them. They are self-evidently true. And these are what a geometer would call axioms or postulates. Okay? And Euclid began with a series of such axioms. For example, that the whole is always greater than the part. Okay? How do I know that? In the same way I know that 1 plus 1 is 2, essentially, because what I mean by the whole of something is that. And if I divide it into parts, I can see that given the meanings of whole and part, the whole must be greater than the part, since the whole consists of its parts. Okay? Or the idea that 2 points describe a line. That is axiomatic. Because in fact, all a line means is 2 points and the shortest distance between them. Okay? Or the idea to get, if you can get more simplistic than this or more fundamental, the principle of identity, that a thing is always identical to itself. Okay? I would challenge you to state anything more basic than that. Okay? And there are other principles which are very like these axioms, which form the basis of logic. For example, the principle of non-contradiction, which states that if A is true, then not A is false. And so it cannot be the case that A and not A are both true. And that's what that says. It is not the case that A and not A. And that is the principle of non-contradiction. The light is on or the light is off. It can't be both ways. You can fudge. You can say, well, it's flickering, so it's kind of on and it's kind of off. Okay, but you understand what I'm saying here. This is purely formal. This lacks all content. Okay? I can plug any content I want into this. I am either alive or I am not alive. Okay? The world exists or the world does not exist. Only one of those can be true because they are contradictories. Okay? Or the principle of the excluded middle. A or not A. You can't have it both ways. Either A is true or not A is true. Okay? All right, so in geometry, we begin with axioms, which are what you might call self-evident propositions. So basic, so intuitively obvious that no proof is required. Okay? And by employing the rules of logic, I can move from an axiom to an inference which follows from that axiom with absolute necessity. And that's the way that geometry works. It is foundational because one belief is founded upon another belief. And Descartes argues that all knowledge is foundational in this way. For example, let's say that I make the claim that the light is on. How do I know that?
Because you see.
Yeah, I see it. Now, if I'm attempting to justify my claim that the light is on the basis of seeing it, what else am I assuming to be true? Okay, I'll buy that. But what else?
That it's a light.
Sure.
That you're seeing it.
That you can see.
All of that stuff, right? If I say, look, the light is on, and you say, how do you know? I say, because I can see it. You might ask me, how do you know that your eyes aren't fooling you?
Because it's on the floor.
Well, sure. But for all I know at this moment, maybe I'm having a hallucination of some sort. Okay? After all, I know my senses have deceived me before. Without question. In fact, if you study optics, you know that sensory deception is unavoidable, really. If you look at train tracks and you look way in the distance, what do they appear to do?
Small.
Yeah, converge, right? They appear to move toward each other. But you know that that's just an appearance. In reality, they don't, because the train doesn't fall off the tracks. Okay? So if I say the lights are on, I am basing that claim on another claim, which is just implicit. I don't state it. Namely, that I trust that what my senses are telling me at this moment is reliable. And that claim rests upon yet another claim, that unless I have reason to believe otherwise, what my senses tell me is in general true. Okay? Or if I say, I don't believe it's going to rain today, and you ask me why, I say because that's what the weather forecast says. And you ask me, why do I trust the weather forecast? I'll say, well, because 9 times out of 10, this particular forecast is correct. Okay? So I've based one belief that it's not going to rain today on another belief that the forecast doesn't call for rain, and I believe the forecast that it's not going to rain today because I have observed that this particular authority predicts the weather 9 times out of 10 correctly. Okay? So this is what's meant by foundationalism. Knowledge is kind of structured like a building. Okay? And you may have many floors. Okay? And let's say that each one of these, I don't know, no. Each floor is a realm of knowledge. Okay? And each of these floors rests upon the one beneath it. Okay? But of course, I know that if I live on the top floor, then I depend upon the floor beneath me to hold me up. And I know that that floor depends upon the one beneath it. And so on, all the way down to the foundation. Okay? And so by extension, this floor, or piece of knowledge, ultimately depends upon something quite distant from it. The foundational. Okay? So here's Descartes' question. How do I know what I know? What are the limits of human knowledge? What can the human mind actually know for certain? And by certain, he is serious. He means beyond the possibility of doubt. Not just beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond the possibility to doubt. Okay? So, he writes this book called Meditations on First Philosophy, which has a kind of subtitle, which is in which the existence of God and the real distinction between mind and body are demonstrated. Okay? So, like any good writer in the sciences, he is telling us right up front what he's going to do. Okay? A philosophical treatise is not a mystery novel. It's not a guessing game. If you read a professional journal, they'll give you an abstract. Here is exactly what I want to prove. Here's how we did it. And here are the details. Okay? Descartes wants to show that before I can claim to have knowledge, like the stuff populating these floors, other propositions must be established first. And that's what he means by first philosophy. He means epistemologically first. And also metaphysically first. Okay? First, I must be sure my foundation is stable. Because there is absolutely no point in building higher if I have any suspicion that this foundation is going to sink. Okay? So we have a series of 6 meditations. And in each one, he tells us from the beginning what his intention is. And at least in 2 occasions, where he ends up by the end of the meditation is not what he had intended to do in the first place. Okay? Both of which, by the way, have to do with the existence of God. It's as if he stumbles on 2 ways to prove that God exists. Okay? Now, whether he actually conceived of this pattern of thought in the order it is presented or not is irrelevant. Okay? What is important is that we see the systematic nature of his inquiry. And this is why professors of philosophy love to teach Descartes, because he's just such a great example of a systematizer. Okay? He shows us what it means to establish a philosophical system piece by piece very carefully. Okay. So when he says meditations on first philosophy, what we should understand is that, first of all, he doesn't mean meditation in the sense of like transcendental meditation. This is not like Buddhist meditation in which I'm trying to clear my mind of all content. Okay? He simply means thinking very critically. Okay? Analysis. And not letting any idea pass that admits of even the slightest doubt. Okay? So we sometimes refer to Descartes' method as hyperbolic doubt or methodological doubt. Just like Socrates had his own method, right? The elenchus, or the dialectical. At least in the first meditation, Descartes' approach is methodological or hyperbolic doubt. If Descartes can doubt any one of his beliefs, he is going to treat it as if it were entirely false. Because if the ultimate goal is absolute certainty, then if any one of his beliefs is in the least bit dubitable, capable of being doubted, then it does not avail him anything. Okay? He will only affirm those judgments which cannot possibly be doubted. And meditation number 1 is destructive in nature, because Descartes very honest about saying that he knows his own propensity to believe that which is false. And from the time he was a child, there have been many occasions upon which he discovered that something he believed to be true later turned out to be false. Something he took for granted. I can give you an example, perhaps, from my own life in which I had this experience. I mean, I remember rather vividly, not when it happened, but the experience of looking up at the moon and seeing for the first time that the crescent moon is just part of the entire sphere, that the rest of it is still there. Because when children first look at a crescent moon, they don't think of it as a sphere. They think it's just the crescent. I remember having the realization, because I caught it just in the right light, where you could see the rest of the sphere there. Now, if I were to have been content for the rest of my life simply to believe what my senses on first blush taught me, I might be of the wrong opinion that the phases of the moon are actual changes in the structure of the moon, rather than different appearances of the same moon. Okay? My senses are deceptive. There's no question. At certain times of the day and the year, I can hold my hand up in front of the sun and block the whole thing out. And if I wasn't capable of reasoning, I might be of the opinion that at that moment my hand is actually bigger than the sun. Okay? So in the first meditation, which is called Of the Things That Can Be Doubted, or something similar to that, depending on the translation, Descartes subjects his beliefs to whatever doubt he can. And if any one of his beliefs is in the least bit dubitable, if I can shed even the slightest doubt upon something I believe, I'm going to treat it as if it's completely false, because it doesn't help me. What I need, says Descartes, is at least one absolutely certain piece of knowledge, an axiom, a foundation. Because once I've got an immovable starting point, then I can very carefully build up from there. Move to other truths, which are also beyond doubt. And in this way, establish a system for achieving knowledge. Okay? All right. Now let's go back to my building here, okay? Let's just say that every office in this building is a piece of knowledge. And it's a much larger building than what I represented here. But even in the direct environment, I believe so many things, I couldn't possibly even list them in the time we have left. I believe that I'm standing here. I believe I'm talking. I believe I have a jacket on that is brown, that there's a table and a bag, that there's a class, that I'm breathing, that the sky is blue, that there are trees, that giraffes are tall. I mean, I can't possibly name to you all the beliefs I have. And Descartes therefore realizes that it would be ridiculous to attempt to doubt each of his beliefs individually, to test them for certainty. But he realizes, given the fact that all knowledge is built upon yet more fundamental knowledge, he doesn't have to test each belief individually. There's a more efficient way of testing his beliefs. How can he do it?
That's the foundation.
Yes. If I have reason to believe that the foundation upon which all my other beliefs are founded is itself unstable, then I can destruct the entire building in one move. Okay? But it actually takes him 3.
Self-doubt now?
He's indeed, at the very beginning of Meditation 2, Descartes does raise the question, is it possible that I myself do not even exist? That even though I've always believed myself to be something, perhaps I am nothing. But let's see how he gets there, okay? So what is the basis upon which most of our beliefs about the world are founded? Yeah, sure. Don't get confused. Of course, he is a rationalist, all right? So he thinks that when it comes to ultimate things, and even to worldly things, before I can know them through the senses, I must first establish something else which cannot be known on the basis of the senses. Okay? But of course, I would never have had any inkling that there was an earth, or a sky, or that I had a body, or that the sky was blue, or that bread could nourish the body, or that there was color or sound or anything else without my senses. Okay? But I know my senses have deceived me before. And as a general rule, it's really kind of foolish to trust a second time that which has deceived me a first. Right? Don't we say something like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me? Right? And I know that my senses do this all the time. I'm driving on the highway and there appears to be smoke emanating from the concrete in the distance, but when you get up there, it goes away. You realize it was just heat you were seeing, right? Or people might see a mirage, an oasis of water in the desert. Your mind may fool you. And in fact, we know that our brain is responsible for filling in the majority of what we take to be given by the senses. Our field of vision is very narrow, as a matter of fact. Your brain does the rest. In fact, what your senses, what your eyes show you, actually is upside down. Your brain flips it right side up. Okay? So at least when it comes to very distant things, like for example, if I were to draw something here, okay, what would you say that is from where you're sitting? A circle, but I can tell you that in fact it's not, it's a polygon. But it's just so far away from you that you can't see the angles. It appears from your distance to be a circle. Okay? Or the business about the train tracks converging in the distance. And we know, an artist will compensate for this. Like architects, in drawing up plans for a skyscraper, might intentionally make the structure wider at the top so that from the ground level it looks symmetrical. Okay? And painters work with light and shadow, chiaroscuro, all the time to deceive us into believing what we're looking at is three-dimensional, when in fact it's not. Okay? So here's how meditation 1 works. Descartes suggests some resource for the beliefs he has, and then proposes a reason why he might doubt that resource. Now, one of the resources upon which I base most all of my beliefs about the world is sensory. But I know that at least when it comes to remote sensory information, simple optical illusion is all the realization I need to know that I cannot uncritically trust what my senses tell me about what is very distant or very small, okay? And I personally choose to use the term remote to refer to that which is either really small, removed from me by size, or very distant, removed from me by distance, okay? So you get that? Right? Over here, you've got a basis for belief. And over here, a basis for doubt. Okay? All right. Now, even though when it comes to things that are very far away or things that are very small, okay, and I suppose I might even be deceived by my senses if there's something wrong with my body, if I'm crying or I'm really emotional or something, I might not see things quite correctly. So the remoteness from the object of my senses might be caused by any number of factors, okay? But I believe other things on the basis of my senses as well, which seem much more certain than, for example, how many sides belong to the polygon I'm looking at 300 feet in the distance, okay? Like what? What else do my senses teach me that seems pretty reliable?
Like fire is hot.
Sure. Fire's hot. Or that I'm standing here right now. Or that there is a table. When I bump into it, it hurts. Okay? When I stub my toe into the foot of my bed in the middle of the night, I'm convinced of the reality of that thing. Okay? That there's a chair, that I have a body, that I'm speaking to my class, that the lights are on, that I'm standing here in a classroom. All of this is known only because of my senses. Even my own body is only known because of my senses. And in the case of my body, not only do I sense it from the outside, I sense it from the inside. Because I can feel when things press up against it. So what about what I might call immediate sensory information? like the fact that there's a table here right now, is there any way that I might come to doubt even that stuff? Now, this is where I find out if you did your reading or not.
I read the first meditation.
Okay, that's all you had to do. How does he doubt, as he puts it, even the fact that he's sitting there in his chair holding a piece of paper near the fire? He says, I have many times believed myself to be doing exactly this.
Like dreams.
Yes,
Dreams.
that's right. I have had this dream countless times, all right? And it's usually just before the beginning of a semester. I'll dream that I'm standing here talking to my class as usual, but things aren't going smoothly, Suddenly I've forgotten how to speak, or I have no idea what I'm supposed to say. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm stumbling over my words, right? And we dream about things like this all the time, I guess, because, you can fail in your dreams without any consequence. Who knows? But what if, despite the fact that I really do believe myself to be standing here right now talking to you, what if I overslept and I'm still in bed? What if you're dreaming right now? You probably wish you were. Dear God, when's this nightmare going to end? About 13 minutes. Okay. Descartes isn't saying that he actually believes himself to be dreaming at this moment. Okay, no more than I believe myself to be dreaming at this very moment. The point is this, that I cannot possibly deny to you that there have been occasions on which I believed that I was awake, only to wake up and discover that I was dreaming. Now, once you awaken, in retrospect, the dream seems fuzzy, and you realize that there's a big difference between how clear, vivid, sequential, organized, predictable waking is in comparison to dreaming.
And he means that from like a physical and rational.
No, he just means to ask you, have you ever been relieved when you woke up from a dream? Did you ever say, oh man, it was just a dream? Yeah. And if you've ever said that, guess what? While it was happening, you didn't know it was a dream. Otherwise, why are you sweating it? Why are you running away from the monster? It's just a dream, man. But until you woke up, you didn't know that. So what if you were to wake up right now, and what seems so real right now, in retrospect, seems equally cloudy and fuzzy as dreams do when you wake from them? Okay? Again, it doesn't matter that he really doesn't believe himself to be dreaming right now. I don't think that I'm dreaming right now because everything seems very clear. Okay? Things are proceeding normally. You guys aren't changing shapes. I'm not suddenly finding myself in a different location altogether without remember having walked there. But I cannot dismiss the fact that I have often woken from dreams that I thought were real while they were taking place. And the question is not even, is it probable that I'm dreaming right now? It isn't. The question is it even remotely possible? Because if it is even remotely possible at all, that this is a dream, that is all he needs Because if I'm dreaming right now, guess what? I'm not touching a physical table. It's just a dream. It's a dreamed up table. In fact, nothing that my senses seem to be telling me right now is true, because it's all just imagery being created by my mind in the dream.
Well, wasn't he trying to say that I have to think very extremely for now until I can
Yeah,
just...
he is. Remember, we call this hyperbolic doubt. What is hyperbole? It's exaggeration. Okay? He's deliberately exaggerating because his goal is so high. His epistemological goal is certainty. And so he can leave no stone unturned. If it is possible to cast doubt on some belief, then he must treat it as if it were absolutely false.
But if you dream something, you've seen it before, right?
Okay, now this is a good point. You might argue, well, let's say I am dreaming right now. And this is exactly how Descartes argues. Mustn't at least the shapes or the colors or the ingredients out of which my mind is concocting this dream have been given to me at some point while I was awake? Okay? Just like an artist might paint a landscape on canvas that doesn't exist in the world. The colors and the shapes and the textures that he's using on the canvas are certainly real. Okay? In other words, aren't there some ideas which are true whether I'm awake or asleep? What about numbers in general? Even if I'm asleep, I can't possibly dream of a square circle.
So is he just trying to make the point that our senses are like not absolute?
At this point, he has successfully shown us that we can't trust our senses, period. Unless at some later point I find a way to overcome the dream objection. Okay? And to some extent he does. Okay? He's not a complete... He's not anti-empirical. He does think we learn on the basis of our senses all the time. We just have to be cautious.
Limitation.
Right. We have to know when it's appropriate to trust our senses and when it isn't. Okay? But we're a long way from there. Even if I'm asleep, a square can't be a circle. 1 and 1 cannot be more or less than 2. A triangle cannot have more or less than 3 sides. Okay? So what about these very simple ideas? And that's basically what Descartes calls them. The third phase of belief and doubt. Simple ideas, out of which this possible dream is being created. Okay? What about the idea of space and time in general? The idea of number and quantity in general, quality in general, movement, velocity, okay? Extension in space, body in general. Mustn't there be some truth about these ideas? And of course, we know Descartes' a mathematician. So he's probably secretly hoping that math will be his answer. Maybe mathematics is the foundational element from which he can base other beliefs. Now, how does he find a way to doubt even these simple ideas? How on earth could I doubt that 1 + 1 = 2? Or that a triangle has 3 angles?
By never
Yeah, but I
having
can
knowledge
disprove
of it?
them, right?
By never having knowledge of it? Never seen?
Well, but I have, right? I mean, how could I possibly be wrong? Even if I'm dreaming right now, how could it be possible that there's no such thing as space and time? How could I be wrong about the idea that the square root of 9 is 3? Because that doesn't change if I'm asleep. What's his answer? And this is really whacked out. This is an extreme, even by Descartes' admission, as he calls it, metaphysical, in the worst sense of the word, basis for doubt.
Is this when he compared himself to insanity? Or is that different?
That's slightly something different, okay? He does recognize that there are people, who we call insane, who fancy themselves to be kings, when in fact, they're just locked up in an asylum or something. But it's this. He says, look, I have always believed in God, okay? And we know Descartes' a Catholic. And in fact, he wrote the letter of dedication for the Meditations to his bishop. He was being very cautious because this follows on the footsteps of Galileo's near excommunication, right, for being a disciple of Copernicus by maintaining that the earth moves around the sun instead of the reverse, okay? So Descartes says, what if I've been wrong about God? What if instead of God, or even in addition to God, there exists some malevolent being, some evil genius, some spirit, a mind, more powerful than I am, that spends all its energy deceiving me about the simplest things? After all, the only way I know that 1 plus 1 is 2 is by counting sets, right? Here's 1, here's another, and that's 2. But what if this demon is so much quicker than I am that every time I draw the second line, he erases the first? Every time I count the angles of a triangle, he throws an extra one in there. Now, believe me, Descartes says, I know that this basis for doubt is just, it verges on ridiculous. He doesn't believe it. The point is it even remotely possible? And I'll submit this to you. If some magician, some illusionist, could walk into this room right now, a mere man, and convince you that he's levitating off the ground, and you know that these illusions happen, imagine what a malevolent angel could do to your mind. Okay? So that even the things which seem most certain to me, even Descartes' beloved mathematics, is not beyond the possibility of falsehood. Even simple ideas can be doubted on the basis of this demon idea. So by the end of Meditation 1, Descartes is distraught. And into the second meditation, he's saying, I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm being thrown around in a whirlpool. I can't get to the top. I can't put my feet on the bottom. And perhaps all I can say is that the only thing which is certain is that nothing is certain. In fact, I am prompted to wonder whether it's possible that I don't even exist. Now, I want you to think about that question. Okay?